The facade rain lashed against the windshield as Nathaniel Blackwood's Aston Martin carved through the night. The 42-year-old tech billionaire barely registered the storm, his mind consumed by the board meeting that had ended in yet another victory. Triumph felt hollow lately, just another zero added to accounts already overflowing. His phone buzzed. Eleanor, his assistant. "The Forbes piece is live. They're calling you the titan who revolutionized quantum computing." "Wonderful," he replied, the word tasting like ash. He tossed the phone onto the passenger seat, accelerating around a curve. Later, he would remember the sudden glare of headlights, the sickening screech of tires on wet asphalt, the violent spin as his car hydroplaned, the airbag deployed with explosive force. Then darkness, consciousness returned in fragments, beeping machines. Antiseptic smell. Pain radiating from everywhere. "Mr. Bennett? Daniel Bennett? Can you hear me?" Nathaniel's eyes fluttered open. A woman in scrubs studied him with professional concern. Confusion washed over him until he remembered the wallet in his glove compartment, the fake ID he'd used years ago to escape reporters. His car must have been so damaged they hadn't found his actual identification. "Yes," he managed, his voice a rasp. "I'm Dr. Patel. You've been in an accident. Multiple fractures, internal bleeding. We've stabilized you, but recovery will take time." As Dr. Patel explained his injuries, Nathaniel made a split-second decision. For once, no one knew who he was. No special treatment. No sycophants. Just a man in a hospital bed valued only for his humanity. "Insurance?" Dr. Patel asked. "No," Nathaniel whispered. "I'm between jobs." Dr. Patel's expression shifted subtly. "I see. We'll have a financial counselor visit tomorrow." After she left, Nathaniel stared at the ceiling. For 15 years, he'd built Quantum Nexus into a global powerhouse, becoming one of the wealthiest men in America. Yet he'd never felt so empty. His last relationship had ended when he discovered Charlotte was more interested in his portfolio than his person. Friends had become business connections. Family had become distant memories. Days passed in a haze of pain and medication. He learned he'd been transferred to Meadowbrook Hospital, a facility that served diverse populations, from the wealthy to the uninsured. As Daniel Bennett, high school physics teacher, he received adequate but minimal care. No private room. No specialist rushing to his bedside. No exceptional treatment. The financial counselor, a tired-looking woman named Mrs. Rivera, had seemed genuinely sorry when explaining his limited options without insurance. The difference was jarring compared to his normal experience of people falling over themselves to accommodate him. 1 week into his stay, Nathaniel observed the hospital's invisible hierarchy. Certain patients, those with premium insurance or notable names, received immediate attention. Others waited. "Good morning, Mr. Bennett," said a new voice one morning. "I'm Josephine Winters. I'll be your nurse for the next few weeks." She was perhaps in her mid-30s with warm brown eyes and dark hair pulled back practically. Something in her direct gaze suggested she saw people, not just patients. "Call me Daniel," he replied, testing his new identity. "Daniel it is," she said with a smile that reached her eyes. "Let's get you comfortable. We have a long road ahead." Little did Josephine know that the battered man before her commanded billions, or that his deception would eventually challenge everything they both believed about wealth, worth, and what it meant to truly see someone. The healer Josephine "Jo" Winters approached her nursing duties with methodical compassion, a skill honed through 12 years at Meadowbrook Hospital. Each patient received the same level of care regardless of their financial status, a philosophy increasingly at odds with administration directives. As she checked Daniel Bennett's vitals, she noted improvements in his condition despite the severity of his injuries. "Your body's fighting hard," Jo said, adjusting his IV. "That's good. We need fighters around here." Daniel studied her with curious intensity. "You've been doing this a long time?" "Long enough to know when someone's holding back," she replied, meeting his gaze. "Pain level? And don't say fine like yesterday." 7, he admitted reluctantly. "Maybe 8 when I breathe deeply." Jo nodded, making a note in his chart. "Honesty helps us help you. I'll speak with Dr. Patel about adjusting your medication." As she worked, Daniel observed her efficiency, how she anticipated needs before they arose, her gentle firmness with difficult patients in the shared ward, the way she remembered personal details about everyone under her care. "You mentioned teaching physics. Joe said as she changed his bandages. High school, right? What drew you to that? Nathaniel hesitated, mentally constructing Daniel Bennett's life. I enjoy watching people understand something for the first time. That moment when confusion transforms into clarity. Joe smiled. That's why I became a nurse. Not for the glamour, obviously. She gestured to her scrubs stained with iodine. For those moments when fear turns to relief. When suffering eases, even temporarily. Over the following days, Nathaniel learned fragments of Joe's story. She'd grown up in a blue-collar neighborhood across town. Her father had died of cancer when she was 19, leaving her to care for her mother with early-onset dementia. She'd worked her way through nursing school, one night shift at a time. My mother passed 3 years ago, Joe mentioned while helping him with physical therapy exercises. Sometimes I think she taught me more about care during her illness than nursing school ever did. I'm sorry, Nathaniel said, genuinely moved. His own parents had died in quick succession a decade earlier. He'd been too busy building his empire to properly grieve them. Thank you. What about your family? Joe asked. None to speak of, he answered truthfully. Joe squeezed his shoulder gently. Well, you've got the Meadowbrook family for now, such as we are. The ward was indeed its own ecosystem. Nathaniel observed Joe with elderly Mr. Gutierrez, who struggled with English. She'd learned Spanish phrases to ease his anxiety. She brought books for college student Tiffany, recovering from appendicitis without visitors. For 8-year-old Mateo, battling leukemia 3 beds down, she created elaborate stories involving his stuffed dinosaur. One evening, hospital administrator Richard Voss conducted a floor inspection. His expensive suit and cologne seemed out of place among the antiseptic smells and worn furnishings. Nurse Winters, Voss said sharply. Why hasn't Mrs. Chambers in the West Wing been transferred to her private room yet? Her husband is on the hospital board. Because Mr. Rodriguez is coding and requires immediate attention, Joe replied evenly, not looking up from the emergency she was handling. Mrs. Chambers is stable. She'll be moved as soon as possible. Voss's lips tightened. See that she is. Remember our priorities. He glanced dismissively at the ward's occupants before departing. Later, Joe returned to check Nathaniel's vitals, her movements betraying frustration. Everything okay? He asked. She sighed. Just administrative pressure. Nothing patients should worry about. The man in the suit seemed concerned about priorities, Nathaniel observed carefully. Joe measured his pulse, her fingers gentle against his wrist. Mr. Voss believes healthcare should operate like a luxury hotel. 5-star treatment for 5-star patients. And you disagree? I believe everyone deserves the same standard of excellent care, she said simply. Whether they're a board member's wife or a teacher without insurance. Nathaniel felt a twinge of guilt at his deception. In his real life, he'd have been one of those priority patients whisked to the finest room without question. That night, sleep eluded him. Through the dimness, he watched Joe tend to Mateo during her overnight shift. The boy had awakened crying from pain or nightmares or both. Joe sat beside him, speaking softly until his small shoulders relaxed. For the first time in years, Nathaniel Blackwood, disguised as penniless Daniel Bennett, felt something crack open within his carefully constructed armor. Here, stripped of wealth and status, he'd become invisible to the world that once catered to his every whim. Yet paradoxically, he'd never felt more seen than when Josephine Winters looked at him with those perceptive brown eyes that measured worth by entirely different standards than Wall Street ever had. The connection. 3 weeks into his stay at Meadowbrook, Nathaniel found himself anticipating Joe's shifts with embarrassing eagerness. His body was healing, ribs knitting together, lacerations fading to pink scars. But something else was happening too, something unexpected. Ready for your victory lap? Joe appeared at his bedside, wheelchair in tow. Hardly seems victorious when you're pushing me, Nathaniel replied. Everyone needs a push sometimes. She helped him into the wheelchair with practiced ease. Even stubborn physics teachers. Their daily walks had become a ritual, technically physical therapy, but increasingly conversations that wandered far beyond medical necessity. Today they headed for the small courtyard garden, a patch of green amid institutional beige. I've been thinking about something you said, Nathaniel began as she parked his wheelchair beside a bench. About teaching you more than nursing school. Joe settled beside him. My mother? Yes, you said illness taught you about care. What did you mean? She considered this, watching a sparrow hop between puddles from yesterday's rain. Technical skills matter. Medication timing, wound management. But they're useless without understanding what healing actually requires. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. My mother couldn't remember my name near the end, but she knew when I was truly present versus just performing tasks. Nathaniel nodded. In his world, people performed constantly, calculated displays of loyalty, ambition, deference. Even his executive team maintained careful facades. Being present sounds simple, he said. It's not. The most important things rarely are. Joe studied him. You've had that look all morning. Penny for your thoughts? I'm living a lie. I own technologies worth billions. I could buy this hospital with my quarterly dividends. Just wondering what happens after discharge, he said instead. Going back to normal life. Which parts worry you most? The question caught him off guard. In his real life, problems dissolved with money. As Daniel Bennett, everything, housing, medical bills, employment, loomed as potential crises. All of it, he admitted. I'm not the same person who drove that car. Joe's expression softened. Nobody leaves here unchanged. That's actually healthy, Daniel. Growth hurts, but stagnation is worse. A comfortable silence settled between them until a voice crackled over the PA system. Nurse Winters to Ward C, stat. Joe squeezed his shoulder as she rose. Rain check on this conversation. Nathaniel watched her hurry inside, efficient and purposeful. The strange double life he'd constructed was becoming problematic. Daniel Bennett was developing a history, connections, and feelings that weren't supposed to exist. Meanwhile, Nathaniel Blackwood's empire continued without him. Eleanor handling day-to-day operations per their emergency protocols, believing he was recuperating privately at his lake house. That afternoon, the ward's atmosphere shifted when Richard Voss arrived with a television crew. Meadowbrook is proud to announce a new partnership with Westlake Medical Group, Voss announced to the cameras. This strategic alliance will enhance our premium care offerings for our most valued patients. From his bed, Nathaniel observed the staff's reactions, tightened expressions, exchanged glances. After the crew departed, conversations erupted in hushed clusters. What does this mean? He asked when Joe returned. It means Meadowbrook is being absorbed by a luxury healthcare provider, she replied, checking his IV with unnecessary focus. Westlake specializes in concierge medicine for the wealthy. And for patients like me? Nathaniel pressed, strangely invested in the answer. Joe's eyes flashed. If Voss has his way, transferred to county facilities. But some of us are fighting it, she lowered her voice. We're meeting tonight to organize. Several doctors, nurses, even some board members disagree with this direction. Later that evening, Nathaniel overheard Joe speaking with Dr. Patel near the nurses' station. We need more time, Joe insisted. These patients aren't inventory to be redistributed. I agree, Dr. Patel said, but we need leverage. Westlake brings significant capital, and the board's concerns are financial. Without an alternative funding source. Their voices faded as they moved down the corridor, but Nathaniel had heard enough. His mind raced with possibilities. As Nathaniel Blackwood, he could solve this problem with a single phone call. But that would end his experiment, his anonymity, whatever was growing between him and Joe. During physical therapy the next day, he noticed Joe's distraction. Bad meeting? He ventured. She helped him navigate the walking bars. Just hospital politics. Nothing for you to worry about. I'm a good listener, he offered, and surprisingly good with problem solving. Joe studied him, seeming to weigh something in her mind. Finally, she said, What would you do if you could change something important but the price was revealing parts of yourself you've kept hidden? The question struck uncomfortably close to his situation. I guess it depends on which matters more, the secret or the change you could make. That's the question, isn't it? She smiled sadly. Come on, one more lap. You're getting stronger every day. Nathaniel realized with sudden clarity that soon he would be discharged. Daniel Bennett would disappear. The thought created an unexpected hollowness in his chest. That night, unable to sleep, he watched Joe moving quietly through the ward. She paused at each bed, adjusting blankets, checking monitors, offering water or medication or simply human contact. When she reached him, their eyes met in the dim light. You should be sleeping, she whispered. So should you, he replied. For a moment, something electric passed between them, unspoken questions, Possibilities, boundaries, neither was ready to cross. "Joe," he began, not knowing what would follow. The moment shattered when Mateo called out in pain from across the ward. Joe squeezed Nathaniel's hand briefly before hurrying away, leaving him with the phantom warmth of her touch and the growing certainty that his carefully constructed facade was becoming the most complicated problem he'd ever tried to solve. The revelation 6. Weeks after his admission, Nathaniel faced discharge. His body had healed remarkably. Dr. Patel called it impressive resilience. But the prospect of leaving filled him with unexpected dread. "Final paperwork," Joe said, placing a folder on his bedside table. "Mrs. Rivera will discuss payment plans when she visits this afternoon." "I'll miss our conversations," Nathaniel said, watching her adjust his monitors one last time. Joe's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. The best patient outcomes mean saying goodbye. What if we didn't say goodbye? The words escaped before he could consider them. "We could meet for coffee, outside the hospital." Joe paused, her professional composure slipping momentarily. "Daniel, just coffee," he insisted. "As friends." Something softened in her expression. "I don't usually," she began, then stopped herself. Coffee might be nice. The small victory lightened his mood, but the mounting complications of his situation remained. His dual existence couldn't continue indefinitely. As Daniel Bennett prepared for discharge, Nathaniel Blackwood's responsibilities demanded attention. Quantum Nexus's stock had fluctuated in his absence. Board members were growing restless. Acquisition negotiations with Stellar Tech needed his direct involvement. His deliberations were interrupted when Richard Voss appeared, trailed by an elegant woman in designer clothing. "This is our general ward," Voss explained, gesturing dismissively. "Post-merger, this space will be renovated for our premium care expansion." "Quite necessary," the woman replied, wrinkling her nose slightly. "The Westlake standard requires significant upgrades." Nathaniel recognized her instantly, Victoria Hargrove, Westlake's CEO, whom he'd met at multiple charity galas. His heart raced as he turned away, praying she wouldn't recognize him beneath the beard he'd grown during his stay. They moved on, but the close call crystallized his predicament. His deception had become untenable, yet revealing himself meant losing the genuine connection he'd formed with Joe. That afternoon, Eleanor texted his secure line. "Board emergency meeting scheduled. Stellar Tech threatening to withdraw. Must confirm your attendance." Nathaniel made his decision. He would reveal himself to Joe first, explain everything, then return to his life with, hopefully, something new and real to bring back with him. His plans collapsed that evening when Victoria Hargrove returned to the ward, alone this time, reviewing renovation plans. Her eyes swept the room, passing over him initially, then snapping back in recognition. "Nathaniel Blackwood." She approached his bed, disbelief evident. "What on earth are you doing here? In this ward?" Before he could respond, Joe appeared with his evening medication. She looked between them, confusion clear on her face. "I'm sorry, ma'am, this is Mr. Bennett," Joe said. "Daniel Bennett," Victoria laughed incredulously. "Daniel Bennett? This is Nathaniel Blackwood, CEO of Quantum Nexus. We serve on the Symphony board together." She turned to him. "Everyone's been told you're recuperating privately. Is this some bizarre publicity stunt?" The ward had gone silent. Every patient, every staff member stared. But Nathaniel saw only Joe's expression transforming from confusion to shock to something far worse, betrayal. "Joe," he began, reaching for her hand. She stepped back. "Excuse me, I need to check another patient." Her voice was perfectly professional, her face carefully blank as she walked away. The aftermath was chaos. News of his identity spread through the hospital like wildfire. By morning, Voss himself arrived, effusive with apologies for the substandard care Nathaniel must have received. A private room was prepared. Specialists were called in. The press gathered outside, spinning narratives about the billionaire's strange masquerade. Through it all, Joe didn't return to his ward. When he asked about her, a different nurse informed him that Nurse Winters had requested reassignment. Against medical advice, Nathaniel left his bed to search for her. He found Joe in the small courtyard garden, sitting alone on their bench. "I can explain," he said, lowering himself painfully beside her. "No need." Her voice was distant. "Your life is yours, Mr. Blackwood. Please don't call me that," he said. Not you. Joe finally looked at him, her eyes wounded. What should I call the man who lied about everything? Who watched us struggle with funding issues when he could have written a check without blinking? Not everything was a lie, he insisted. What happened between us was real. Was it? How would I know? She stood, creating distance between them. You observed us like specimens in an experiment. Collected data on how the other half lives. It doesn't matter now. She straightened her scrubs. Your private healthcare team arrives within the hour. Dr. Patel has already transferred your records. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed with texts from Eleanor, his board, his lawyers, all the trappings of Nathaniel Blackwood's life reclaiming him. Joe, wait, he called as she walked away. The merger with Westlake, I can stop it. I can help Meadowbrook. She paused without turning. More billionaire games? More manipulation? No, he said desperately. I want to fix this. Joe finally faced him, her expression composed but eyes glistening. Some things can't be fixed with money, Nathaniel. That was the lesson you should have learned here. She walked away, leaving him alone in the garden, the weight of his true identity settling back onto his shoulders like a familiar but now uncomfortable coat. He truthed between worlds. 3 days after leaving Meadowbrook, Nathaniel sat in his penthouse office, surrounded by the trappings of power that once defined him. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic city views that now seemed oddly flat, lacking the vibrancy of the small hospital courtyard. The board is appeased, Eleanor reported, but Stellar Tech wants assurances you're fully back before proceeding. Nathaniel barely heard her, his attention fixed on his computer screen displaying Meadowbrook. Hospital's financial records obtained through channels that would have horrified Joe. Schedule a meeting with Victoria Hargrove, he said finally, and contact our foundation. I need to redirect some funds. Eleanor hesitated. Sir, about the press coverage of your hospital stay, PR suggests a statement about experiencing our healthcare system firsthand for research purposes. No statements, he replied firmly. And Eleanor? Find Josephine Winter's contact information. After she left, Nathaniel drafted and deleted a dozen messages to Joe. Each attempt felt hollow, his billion suddenly useless in crafting the one thing he needed, authentic words to bridge the chasm his deception had created. Meanwhile, at Meadowbrook, Joe faced her own struggles. Her colleagues alternated between prying for details about the billionaire, patient, and congratulating her on securing the hospital's future. Rumors had spread that Blackwood planned to intervene in the Westlake merger. You must have made quite an impression, Dr. Patel remarked during rounds. He observed suffering and responded with conscience, Joe replied stiffly. It's what humans should do, regardless of net worth. But alone in the locker room after her shift, Joe confronted more complicated truths. She'd developed feelings for a man who didn't exist, or rather, existed differently than she'd believed. More disturbing was the realization that she missed him. Not Nathaniel Blackwood, the billionaire, but the attentive, thoughtful man who'd listened to her stories and shared her concerns. 1 week later, Richard Voss called an emergency staff meeting. The Westlake merger has been canceled, he announced, visibly strained. Furthermore, Meadowbrook has received an anonymous donation establishing an endowment for uninsured patient care. Whispers erupted throughout the room. Everyone suspected the donor's identity, though the foundation handling the gift maintained strict confidentiality. After the meeting, Joe found a sealed envelope in her locker. Inside was a handwritten note, "Coffee still stands. If you're willing, tomorrow 2 p.m. Riverside Cafe." She recognized the handwriting from Daniel's hospital intake forms. Her first instinct was refusal, yet something, curiosity, unresolved feelings, or simply the desire for closure, led her to the cafe the following afternoon. Nathaniel sat at a corner table, dressed in simple clothes reminiscent of his hospital stay, rather than the power suits splashed across business magazines. He stood when he saw her, uncertainty replacing his usual confidence. "You came," he said, relief evident. "I'm still deciding if that was wise." Joe remained standing. "Why am I here, Nathaniel?" "Because I owe you the truth. All of it." He gestured to the empty chair. "Please, over the next hour." Nathaniel shared the full story, the accident, his impulse decision, and how what began as an experiment transformed into something profound. "I've spent years surrounded by people who value what I represent rather than who I am," he explained. Then you treated Daniel Bennett, a nobody with nothing to offer, with dignity and compassion I hadn't experienced in decades. That's literally my job, Jo countered, though her tone had softened. No, your job is medical care. You provided humanity. Nathaniel leaned forward. You showed me what I'd lost. Connection, purpose beyond profit, the ability to see value in places my world ignores. Jo studied him, searching for signs of the man she'd known. So what now? You've had your enlightenment, donated your money, returned to your tower and remember us fondly? That depends on you, he said quietly. I've established a foundation to address healthcare inequity. It needs a director who understands both worlds, someone uncompromising in their principles. You're offering me a job. I'm offering you a platform, he corrected, and hoping for a second chance personally and professionally, not as your employer or benefactor, but as someone who values your perspective. Jo was silent for a long moment. I won't be managed or directed, not even by you. I wouldn't expect otherwise. And personally, she hesitated, that requires something money can't buy, trust. It needs to be rebuilt gradually. Hope flickered in his eyes. Gradually works. We could start with another coffee next week. As equals. She raised an eyebrow. Despite considerable evidence to the contrary. Different resources, equal worth, Nathaniel clarified. You taught me that. Outside the cafe window, hospital staff hurried past. Doctors, nurses, orderlies alongside patients and visitors from all walks of life. Two worlds that had always coexisted but rarely connected meaningfully. Jo finally extended her hand. Another coffee. No promises beyond that. As their hands met, Nathaniel recognized the moment for what it was. Not a fairy tale ending, but a beginning. One that acknowledged the complexities of their different worlds while daring to build something authentic between them. No promises, he agreed. Except honesty from now on. That's a good start, Jo said, the faintest smile finally warming her eyes. After all, healing always begins with truth. In that small cafe, halfway between the hospital where they'd met and the towers where he worked, Nathaniel Blackwood and Josephine Winters began the delicate process of discovering who they might become together. Not despite their differences, but because of the understanding those differences had forged. The real work, they both knew, lay ahead. But for the first time in his life, Nathaniel measured wealth in possibilities rather than possessions. And for Jo, the principles she'd always upheld found new purpose in unexpected alliance. Between their worlds, something genuine had taken root, fragile but resilient like all truly valuable things.